Hello, everyone, and welcome to Arise and Shine. I hope you are doing very well. I hope the Lord is keeping you. I hope you're drawing near to the Lord. And today I just wanted to share a message with you, which is that women are easily deceived. And so as women, as girls, we really need to be careful about how we go about our lives, because we are more prone to deception, and we are more prone to marketing and advertising and sales, and we fall for that more easily than men. So recently I had heard this quote actually, and so it's not a Christian quote, it's not from the Bible, so I don't want to spread any misinformation, but I'll just read it and because it really got me thinking about something. It's actually by George Orwell. You might know that he's got a book called 1984. I believe it's from the book itself. And I'll read the quote first, which says, "It was always the women, and above all the young ones, who were the most bigoted adherents of the party, the swallowers of slogans, the amateur spies and nosers out of unorthodoxy." So again, I don't want to spread any sort of misinformation. I'm not trying to condone or say George Orwell is this or that. I don't know anything about him, but I just saw this phrase, which was swallowers of slogans, and I really thought, wow, that's actually a very interesting phrase, and it really reminded me of some certain things in the Bible, and I just want to read it. And it's about how women are easily deceived, and whether we like that or not, unfortunately this is the truth, and this is quite biblical because we know what happened in the garden. But first I will read from 1 Timothy 2:13, which says, I'll actually start reading from verse 9 just to provide a bit of context. Now, the whole chapter initially starts with speaking about men and their role, and then it moves on to women. So it says, "In like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women, professing godliness with good works. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission, and I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and godliness with self-control." So here we see the passage, but I specifically want to draw your attention to verse 14, which says, "And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression." And this refers obviously back to Genesis 1 in the Garden of Eden. And then we see in Genesis chapter 3 what happens when the fall takes place, and that is when Eve eats of the fruit. So I'm going to read Genesis chapter 3 from the top. "Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Has God indeed said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die, For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate." And we know the rest of what happened. But this passage is so interesting because what I see is actually, if you think about it, this whole passage, this dialogue between the serpent and the woman Eve, it actually works like, if you really think about it, a marketing ad, an advertising pitch, a sales pitch, if you will. So see how in verse 1, the serpent says, And he said to the woman, has God indeed said you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Now, so the serpent is trying to gain a foothold here, right? So it's this line, you shall not eat of every, has God indeed said you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? It's like every ad opening line. That's what it usually starts off with, some sort of a tag opening line that's like, are you tired of going to the gym and not seeing results? Those ads, those very typical ads that you hear. And, in that moment, with that question, it gives the serpent a foothold, because then it's getting the person to think, to reconsider their situation, to think about a problem that they might have, that they supposedly might have, that they never thought of, right? And so then in verse 2-3, she says, and the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. So in this verse, it's like Eve clarifies what God has told her. So the serpent said, did God really say that? And then she said, this is what God really said. But then in verse 4, you see this. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. Full stop. Right? This is the slogan. You will not surely die. So the serpent gives her a slogan. You will not surely die. Right? And then in the next verse, it says, for God knows, and this is the serpent talking, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So now the serpent is selling her the fruit. He's pitching the fruit, the product to her. He's saying, for God knows that in the day you eat of the fruit, your eyes will be opened. So he's selling the benefits to her. He's saying, your eyes will be opened. You'll be like God. You'll know good and evil. So he's selling the benefits of this fruit, which is the product, to her. Okay, and the next verse you see, this is what verse 6 says now, okay? It says, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. So I want to draw your attention to that, to the contrast between verse 5 and 6. And I mean, it's not even a contrast, it's that they're following the same sort of pattern. So in verse 5, the serpent pitches her with 3 benefits of eating the fruits. 3 so-called benefits. They're not real benefits, right? The devil is never real. He's always going to come as an angel of light. So he's going to package something as light or as good, but it's not. So it's not a real benefit. So he says, for God knows that in that day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So these are 3 benefits. And see what it says in verse 6. It says, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise. So with the 3 benefits that the serpent pitches, she perceives 3 benefits for herself. Again, not real benefits. They're empty benefits, right? Pseudo benefits, if you will. So I just want to, again, so this is something, I can't take credit for it. This is something that I actually learned somewhere else. And it is I'm going to go to 1 John 2, chapter 2, verse 15 to 16. Which says, verse 15 onwards, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. So here we see the 3 sort of sins, or what is in the world. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. And we see here, and this is what I saw somewhere else, and I thought it was great, is that we see those 3 in this in Genesis chapter 3, which is, you see the devil pitch those 3 lies. he says you eat of it and your eyes will be open. So lust of the eyes. And it'll be you'll be like God. So lust of the flesh. And then it's like knowing good and evil, pride of life. And again, with the same thing in verse 6, where the woman sees the so-called benefits, she says, pleasant to the eyes. So that's lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes. A tree desirable to make one wise, so lust of the flesh. And, sorry, it was good for food, so lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes is pleasant to the eyes, and tree desirable to make one wise is pride of life. So we see that those three things of the world were pitched to her and she accepted it, right? Which is very interesting. But the other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is the fact that in verse 6, again, same verse, it says, so when the woman saw, and this is very important because it means that women are easily deceived by their sight. I mean, it can be interpreted in a number of different ways, but women especially, things really attract their aesthetics. They're really focused on aesthetics. And you see this all the time in social media now, where everything's about aesthetic value, doing things for the aesthetics. Everything has to be aesthetically pleasing. And, aesthetics on their own, it's not a bad thing. But, it's actually a good thing to beautify things, to make things look nice and presentable. That's a good thing. And it could even be an art. But where it gets tricky is when you lead with that, when you lead with your eyes and when you lead with aesthetics, or when something pleases the eyes, therefore it's good. And when aesthetics start to become your discernment instead of God's voice. Here we see that the woman, she saw the aesthetics of it and not in a necessarily literal sense. She saw that it was good for food, it was good, pleasant to the eyes, and desirable to make one wise. So one of it was aesthetics though. It was pleasant to the eyes. And then of course she thought it would be good for her flesh. It would satisfy her flesh. And then again, she thought it would make one wise, it would make her improve her status in some way. And honestly, this is a key to most marketing. When most marketing goes out there, that's how they pitch it, that it looks great, it will do something for your flesh, and it will improve your status in society in some way. So, and so that's really interesting because it follows that just a very typical advertisement style, marketing style, right? Now, the next thing I wanted to draw your attention, so, aesthetics is fine on its own, but yeah, that the issue comes when you start to use your aesthetics as your discernment, and you start to make that the way you make your decisions essentially. And so Eve, so here we see that Eve put the aesthetics over God's voice. So her discernment was off. Okay, and this is something, and she was easily deceived by that sales pitch and that marketing from the serpent because her discernment was off. And oftentimes women, their discernment can be off. I'm not saying for all, but it can be off because you're discerning with the wrong thing. You're discerning with your eyes when you should actually be discerning with the word of God, with God's voice. And Eve wasn't doing that in this instance. I mean, on a side note, I think it's kind of hilarious in a little way because it says, Eve says, and a tree desirable to make one wise. So that was one of the things that swayed her into eating the fruit. But I think it's so hilarious because Adam and Eve were the only people on planet Earth. I mean, apart from the animals and, God, but he wasn't a person in that sense. He wasn't on Earth as a human. So they were the only two people. I don't know why she wanted to be more wise, like more wise compared to what or to who. So, I don't know, maybe there's more context there that I don't have. But I thought it was kind of funny. And so now that look at the next verse, it said, actually the end of that verse, she also gave to her husband with her and he ate. So we see that Eve was deceived first. And once she was deceived, then it was only a matter of time before Adam was deceived too, through Eve. So the devil and deception comes or enters the family or enters, usually the family through Eve. It entered through the woman. She was the one who was deceived. And so we really need to be careful of that. And that's why, 1 John, as I read before, 2:15 says, do not love the world or the things of the world. This is why we really need to be cautious against marketing. We really need to be cautious about the things of the world. What are they offering us, and is it worth it? Is it going to take us closer to God or away from God? Is it going to be beneficial to us, or is it just feeding our flesh even more? So we really need to be careful of, what we're buying and what we're buying into as women, especially. I mean, everyone needs to have that discernment, but especially women. And I wanted to draw, I wanted to draw an example, which is actually the Stanley Cup. This is a great case study of this. The Stanley Cups. I'm not sure if you maybe live under a rock and you don't know what the Stanley Cup is. It's those big cups with the straw in it, and it's got a handle, and it's all the rage amongst women, and it has been for a few years now, I believe. And I'm not being a hypocrite in this. I do not have a Stanley Cup, and I never really wanted one anyways. But I was just reading about the Stanley Cup, and if you don't know the history of the Stanley Cup, that company's been around for quite a number of years, maybe since the early 1900s, but it was initially used as, a vessel for water and things like that during the war even, and military used it during World Wars, apparently. This is what I saw online. But more recently, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was used for workmen and also for outdoorsy sort of people, that they can use it as a flask when they're going outdoors and doing these sort of things. So it was targeted to men for hundreds of years, actually. And it was not hundreds of years, but over 100 years. And what really took them to have, skyrocketing sales in recent years, and what switched them to have this entirely new women's market and girls market, is actually just the fact that this is a great example of how women they drive the sales, because it was only women who decided that, yes, I need a Stanley Cup. It looks great. It's helpful for my lifestyle. And yes, it's going to improve my status now because everyone has a Stanley Cup. So it follows that same sort of principles. And so this just proves how, this company was doing sort of mediocre, it seems. But with the sales to women, it just took it to another level that it hasn't gotten before. So it's a great example of that. But I now also want to read to you just one more verse in Genesis chapter 3, which is verse 15. And it says, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." So here it actually says that I will put enmity between you and the woman. There is enmity between the serpent and women. He has a specific hate or a rage towards women specifically. And, we can speculate about, why that is. And of course, God had already said it. So, everything follows what God says. But if you see in Revelation, I wanted to read to you Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. It says, "And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." And so it's a little bit of a different context. It's a different verse. It's in Revelation. But, this is how the dragon, being the serpent or Satan, and he's enraged with the woman, and with her offspring. And so, and obviously women will be saved through childbirth. That's what we read earlier. But it just goes to show that the serpent hates us, and so he is going to come for women. He's going to try to deceive them. And women, we unfortunately can become the foothold or the entry point for the devil into for the serpent into our lives or into the family home. So as women, we need to be really, really, really careful about what we buy and what we buy into on a daily basis. We need to exercise our discernment. Thank you, everyone. Stay blessed.